Hey, Roob, how are you doing?
Doing good, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing well.
How's your summer going?
My summer's going great, I think. I hope.
How about that weather? Ooh, man.
Weather, man.
Yeah,
Weather's weather.
it's been weathery.
This is the Eagle Eye Podcast with Reuben Frank. I'm Dave Zangaro. We're joking around a little bit because we're recording this early. We're doing this it's June 10th when we're recording this.
Is it right? Is it June 10th?
It's not when you're listening to it. You're into your summers. You're hopefully enjoying them. Maybe you're listening to this at the beach or on a vacation. Maybe you're still at work and you're wishing you were at one of those places.
Maybe you're at one of those places wishing you were at work.
Less likely, but possible.
Possible.
We have a fun episode today. We want to go through some Eagle superlatives, and you'll get the drift of this once we really get into it. I think we just start. We just start it?
Just start it.
Okay. Who's the most underrated player you've covered?
The most underrated. You're just getting right into it. No small talk, just right into it.
Well, I did the small talk.
Okay. I'm going Andy Harmon. Andy Harmon was, I think, one of the most underrated defensive players in the league during his whole. He didn't have a long career because of the injuries. His knees were a mess. I think everyone who played at the Vet had that problem. But for one stretch, he was as talented as any interior lineman in the league. He's still second in Eagles history in sacks by a defensive tackle. And it was all kind of condensed into like 4 or 5 years. He had a 4-year period at 38 and a half sacks as an interior lineman. 6th-round pick out of Kent State. He had the second most sacks out of all interior linemen in the league during that period. So behind John Randall. So never made a Pro Bowl. He had a couple double-digit sack seasons as a D tackle and didn't make a Pro Bowl. Never really understood why. He had the numbers to do it, but he was a really tough run defender, just a really good all-around player on some teams that, that whole – I mean, he played a year with Reggie. He played with Jerome. He played with all those guys. He was like the last kind of surviving good player on those teams who stuck around here because he was drafted in 91, so he was stuck here for 4 years. But to me, he's the most underrated player.
That's a good one. And I think for a lot of these, like your answers are going to be different than my answers. My answers are going to be a little more recent, certainly. I'm going to go with Rodney McLeod.
Good one.
It kind of gets overlooked on those teams, and especially because he had Malcolm at his position at safety, and Malcolm got all the fanfare, and he was really good, obviously. But Rodney was just really solid. And you think about like the backbone of that team, he was one of those players.
Yeah.
He had a nice run here.
He did. He had a really good career here. Undrafted player out of Virginia. I think the Super Bowl, he was so good in that game. And you think about how they gave up 30 points. He had 2 open field tackles on Gronk in that game that saved touchdowns. And the Patriots, I think they got field goals on both those drives, but he saved a lot of points. And that's not an easy play to make, open field tackle on that dude. So I think the defense did not play well in that game, but at a couple points they made plays they had to make. And that's what you have to do against that offense and that quarterback. Just make a couple plays here and give your offense a chance, and he did that.
Yeah, just a really good career. Still playing, which is pretty cool.
Still playing, and great guy.
Great guy, yeah. He's been on our waves recently. Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah. He's our colleague now.
Kinda.
You have an offensive underrated player?
I don't, but I also didn't think about it very much.
Yeah, me either.
You can say like a Jason Avant. Man,
Sure.
I'm just listening to guys who work with us now. But no, he was certainly underrated.
Say Barrett Brooks was pretty underrated. All right.
Yeah. Next one is most overrated player. Want me to go first on this one? And I covered him a little bit. Jason Babin. I mean, those 18 sacks were all smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
And this is tricky because it's meaner when you're doing the overrated. But he was a guy that, like, the stats were what they were, but his impact was way different.
Yeah, and I think what it was he was so openly like disinterested in and disgusted by the notion of making a tackle against the run. He was getting those sacks. He was just chasing sacks. That's all he did. He never played in any kind of team concept. And he had a position coach in Wash Sr., who encouraged that. He just wanted him to get sacks. And that's all he cared about. I'll never forget being in the locker room after a game and some media guy asked him, you guys gave up 188 rushing yards. What was going on there? He's like, don't ask me about stopping a run. Like, he was just so blatant about it. That's a good one.
Do you have one?
I went with, and I hate doing this because I really liked the guy and I really enjoyed getting to know him, and he was very different than I expected he'd be. Ended up doing a couple of appearances with him. But Michael Vick was 20-20 as the Eagles quarterback. He had that run. His first 11 starts, he was 8-3. After that, he was 12-18. So he just had that one like really good kind of 2-month period. He was so talented, and he was really still in his prime when he started playing here. I just thought he could have done so much more with what he had. And that playoff game, against the Packers is the ultimate. I mean, 4 shots, and he just throws that ball up on first down to Riley Cooper that Tramon Williams intercepted, and that was just kind of indicative of his stay here. There was he had so much ability to be so much better than he was, and it just never happened.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. He's one I wouldn't have thought of, but I get it.
Yeah, Babin's a good one.
Funniest player you've covered?
Funniest player I've covered. There's some really good candidates. A couple corners. I mean, Slay would be in the mix. Asante would be in the mix.
That's my answer, by the way.
Asante?
Yeah.
He would
just crack me up.
He was so funny. But I went with Mike Golick.
Oh,
again,
good.
A guy before your time. Because he was
once guest on this podcast, Mike Golick.
Yeah, you're right. That's right. And went into a long career on the radio. He was very good. But he was funny in the locker room with us. He loved the media, and I think he was closer to us than his teammates. But he was like Kelsey, and you just sit at his locker and just shoot the breeze for an hour and then leave the locker room. And he was really naturally hilarious. And
Asante would crack me up.
Yeah,
because he had no filter.
Yeah,
he would say whatever he wanted, and I love that quality.
Yeah, he was funny. I mean, we saw him in the locker room and the stuff with like Damo and then when Les and Jeff had their little dust up, I mean, as soon as they walked in the locker room, he was so loud.
Yeah.
And like people in the far reaches of the locker room would be cracking up. But at practice, I mean, he was a trip. I remember he would trash talk with Marty, across the field. And it was just really funny stuff. I mean, he'd have everybody in the stands cracking up. Really naturally funny guy.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
How about the scariest player?
Yeah, this is a tricky one for me.
Mm-hmm.
There was a defensive tackle. He was actually an all-pro with the 49ers named Michael Carter.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Carter had been the national high school shot put record holder.
Okay.
He might still be. Some crazy through the shot, like 74 feet in high school. That was obviously the 12-pound shot, not the 16-pounder. But I think he ended up being a Olympian, but he was a pretty good defensive tackle early in his career. And the Eagles signed him back in the early 90s. They signed so many older, washed up guys. And I went up to him in the locker room and asked him about the shot put and his record. And he just glared at me like, I really thought he was going to kill me. Like he had no interest in talking about it. And he didn't want to say like, I don't want to talk about it. He just glared at me. He didn't say a word. He was terrifying.
Yeah.
I still kind of look behind me to make sure he's not back there somewhere.
I have one that like in hindsight, he shouldn't have been that scary, but it was just so intense.
Okay.
And so like angry all the time. Ryan Matthews.
Yeah.
He was intense, man.
He was
just super all the time. Just like, and I always give him credit for that game in Detroit where he fumbled up. He took ownership of it. Like, I didn't dislike him, but he was like an intimidating guy.
Yeah, I had to be in that group and ask him those questions.
Mm-hmm.
It was awful. I never saw him smile, never saw him laugh.
Never.
And he was pretty good back.
He ended up being better than DeMarco here.
Yeah. He ended up being, I mean, he averaged like 4.6. He's got one of the highest averages in the Eagles history.
Yeah.
Like second to Shady or something like that. But then he had that neck injury and he never played again and nobody ever saw him again.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where he is. Where's he from? I don't think about him.
I think California.
I never had a conversation with him. But yeah, he was
intense.
He was intimidating.
The other guy I had on my list was Andrew Sandejo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was just a bad guy.
I don't know that.
I do.
He wasn't super happy.
He wasn't super happy.
How about the next one? Most unique player.
That was such an interesting question.
It's a little open-ended.
Yeah. I went with Darren Sproles.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I went with Sproles because he could do so many different things. And to play at that size, I mean, it's incredible what he was able to do. And not just as a returner. I mean, over the years, he piled up some pretty good, not here as much, but early here, piled up some pretty good offensive numbers, receiving, rushing. He could do anything. And to do it at that size and for so long, I just have so much admiration for him and what he's able to accomplish. There's never been anyone like him.
Yeah. He's me and him really saw eye to eye.
Yeah, I'm big fan of his.
Yeah, he was a fun player to watch too.
Yeah, he really was when he was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you went with like the career being unique. I took this in a different direction.
Yeah, I wasn't sure exactly.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I made it fun. It was like really open-ended. Unique, I'm going Michael Bennett.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Unique personality.
Okay.
And honestly, a unique play style too. He wore those like almost non-existent shoulder pads.
Yeah.
Like he's not like teach tape, right? Like you can't teach the way he played. But his play style really fit who he was as a person. I loved having him around for that year.
Yeah, you really hit it off with him. He liked you.
I don't know if he liked me or not. That was kind of the fun of it.
Hey, you did.
Like you would approach Michael Bennett and say, "Hey, Mike, do you have a minute? What do you want to talk about?" And you tell him what you want to talk about, and he would sit there and think about it and go, "Okay." Yeah, but he was just a fun guy. Cool music taste. I remember that year he kind of took control of the music in the locker room and just like a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, it was
I started like writing it down, and eventually I was gonna like ask him about it, and then the season didn't go great.
You still have that list?
Somewhere I have a Spotify playlist, I think.
Really?
Michael Bennett's locker room playlist. And eventually I was going to write this story. I was going to talk to him about music and had the Spotify player embedded and just never got to do it.
The stories that we don't get to write.
Yeah.
Just have a list of those.
Some of those are really good.
Yeah.
But he was a fun guy to have around.
He was. But I could see why he was quite the locker room politician.
He's just a different cat.
Yeah.
And acquired taste probably.
Yeah, I think the Eagles maybe were afraid that he had a very strong personality. Maybe they were afraid of the effect he would have on some of the younger players.
Yeah,
he's not a bad guy.
He didn't get along with the coaching staff here.
No, he did not.
Yeah. But he had accomplished so much. He kind of came in with clout.
Yeah.
And he was good that one year.
He was.
9 sacks, I think.
Yeah. 9.5.
All right. Next one is current player most likely to make the Hall of Fame. And this is fun because you can pick one, like you're at the end of it.
2 ways to go. Yeah. Obviously, this is a question. And if you asked it a year ago, it would have a different answer.
Sure.
I'm tempted to say Lane. But then you think, well, maybe Saquon if he has a bunch of more good, huge years, probably not. Jalen, if he's accomplished more, in 4 years as starter than most quarterbacks who are in the Hall of Fame. But I just don't know if he'll be good enough. Out of the other young players, there's not a lot of options. Like who's been to multiple Pro Bowls already? Landon Dickerson, I'm not sure he's. So I'm going to say Lane because I think Lane is 2 All-Pros away from being a really good candidate. Now he's 34, and he didn't make it. He didn't make first team. I think he made second team last year, all pro. But I think he might have the best chance. And we're in a really lucky period where between Fletch and JP and Kelsey, I mean, there's some really legitimate candidates that have come through the NovaCare complex. But I'm going to go Lane.
Lane was my answer too. But for me, it came down to Lane or AJ Brown.
Okay.
Now, I think it's, in a way, it's tougher at receiver because we're in an era with really good ones.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it's going to come down to longevity, and we don't know that.
Right.
He could end up having that great long career, and CeeDee Lamb could, not, or Jack Jefferson could not, and he ends up being the guy. But I think he's playing at such a high level that he's going to be in the mix. And then if you don't go with him, I think you have to go like Jalen Carter, off of potential.
Yeah. I mean, I would always take the quarterback. I mean, he's already been to a Super Bowl. He's, he's put up good numbers, really good numbers at times. But, I think last year certainly didn't help his Hall of Fame chances, but we've seen him play at a really, really high level, and quarterbacks that win Super Bowls, are in the mix. But Lane's got 5 Pro Bowls, 2 All Pros, a ring. I think he's got the best chance.
Yeah, I agree with that. Next one is current player most likely to become a coach.
That was a tough one because I think most great players don't want to coach because they made so much money and the hours are awful. I mean, you're working thanklessly. Those guys get in the office at, somebody get in there at 4:45 in the morning and get to work.
Some don't leave.
So the higher paid guys, the guys who've been in the league a long time, just it's not something. So I struggle with this one. I think James Bradbury would be a pretty good coach. I think he's a guy who, look, I know last year obviously wasn't a good year for him, but he's played the game at a high level, and he's a good communicator. He's well-spoken. He's very smart. He understands the game. And I think he did enough that even if his career is over, he did enough where I think players would respect him. He's been an All-Pro. He's been a Pro Bowler. He's got, 20-some-odd career interceptions. So even though we kind of look at him now as a guy that, when are they going to cut him? I think he'd be a pretty good coach.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that, on-field accomplishments really don't mean anything when it comes to coaching.
Well, I think there's some respect that comes along with it, but really when you get down to it, it's come down to how well do you know the game and communicate what you know.
Yeah. I'm going with Nakobe Dean.
Really?
Yeah, I think Nakobe's a really smart guy. I think he knows football really well. I could see him.
Might be really soon the way things are going for him.
That's me. I think he has a lot of what you'd want in a coach. And I could see him he has that Mike linebacker, he wants to play, he wants to be vocal. Now, the accent's a tricky thing sometimes. He's tough to understand, but I think he'd be a really good coach.
Who's the least likely on the current roster to be a coach? Also, Will Greer would be a safe answer.
Yeah.
He'll be
next week, maybe.
Yeah.
Just look at the backup quarterbacks and find the coaches. Least likely?
I don't even know if there's an answer to that.
I don't know if there's an answer to that.
I couldn't see Slay doing it just because
although he coaches up young defensive backs all the time.
He does, but
I mean, from a personality standpoint,
I don't know. He just might not be serious enough.
Maybe, but
he'd probably be good at it if he wanted.
He has his serious moments though.
Oh, no doubt.
And he really does coach up young defensive backs, young receivers. So he has a little bit of that in him.
Yeah.
Next one here. Current player most likely to work in media. Another one a year ago would have been an easy answer.
Yeah. I struggle with this one.
Did you?
Yeah.
I ended up with Jordan Davis.
Really?
Yeah, jovial, good talker. I think he'd be fun on TV. Now, Brandon Graham has a leg up. He's done the NFL camp. He's been involved a little bit.
I put him down. That's who I have on my list as BG. He's got the personality for it. He's opinionated, as we saw last week, back in the spring,
a few months ago.
Sorry, get confused here. I think Saquon would be pretty good. He's
that's
really
good.
Smooth. There's a smoothness about him that I think TV would like. I think the mic would like him.
Yeah, it's good. All right, let's do one more and then take a break.
Yeah.
Next one here, player you've covered who could run for office.
There's a guy, Alan Dial, who was a safety in training camp with the Eagles in the 90s. And he became like he became a district attorney and never lost a case, and then became a judge. He's now like a federal judge. He's a brilliant guy. Wasn't much of a safety, but I remember Buddy Ryan was asked about him. He said, yeah, he'd be president one day. So I kind of kept that in mind. He might be president one day. So I'll go Alan Dial.
Okay. I mean, John Runyon was in office for a while.
He was, yeah.
I went more recent. I think Connor Barwin.
Yeah.
Would be a really good.
He was my first, but I used him as an answer to another question, so I took him off there.
Yeah, that's fair. The two guys that came to my mind were Connor Barwin or Malcolm Jenkins.
Yeah, definitely see that.
Guys who were like, I've already talked politics quite a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, Malcolm's been involved with lawmaking, like when he was with the team. So
yeah.
I could see one of those guys.
Yeah.
And Connor's like, I feel like he's smart enough to just figure stuff out.
Yeah. I mean, if he wanted to, he could run for office in Philly. I mean, he knows the community. Mm-hmm. He does so much in the community. And I think he's really shrewd about working with, kind of working through channels and committees and different offices. He really knows how to get things done.
All right, let's take a break, and we have plenty more on the other side.
You deserve a car that thrills you, a car that puts goosebumps on your goosebumps. At Nissan, we got everything from turbocharged SUVs to 100% electric vehicles that'll make your heart beat faster. Experience the thrill for yourself and shop your local Nissan store at nissanusa.com today.
Celebrity cook Steve Martorano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martorano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations at Martorano's Prime on Open Table. All right, we're back here on the Eagle Eye Podcast. Roob, next one up here. Player you've covered who's been the best in media.
Yeah, and there's a lot of them. Like everybody from those 80s team went into the media. Everybody, every single guy on the team. Some weren't that good. Some were really good. The best, I thought, was Eric Allen. Who,
oh, really?
Yeah. He was hired by ESPN as a studio guy. He only did it for a couple of years. I don't know why he stopped doing it, but he was exceptional. He was really smart and one of those guys that has the ability to express like X and O type stuff in terms that everyone can understand.
Makes it digestible.
Yeah, without getting too, in the weeds. Really smart guy, knew the history, very opinionated. I thought he was terrific. Yeah.
I didn't even know he did media.
Yeah, very short, maybe 2 years.
Wow. For me, there haven't been that many since I started covering the team. So I think I already have to give it to Kelsey.
Yeah, you can do that.
He's killing it.
I mean, just seeing him do those couple of halftime shows.
Yeah.
You just know how good he is at it.
Yeah, I think he's going to be good with ESPN too. I really do.
Yeah, how could he not be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It kind of leads us to the next one. Player you think could have done media, but either hasn't done much of it or hasn't done it at all. And
that's where I have Connor Barwin because I think he'd be exceptional at it. And again, the same qualities that would make him a good politician. I mean, he's very clear. He's very smart, thinks quickly. He really knows the game. He's a guy that always wants to learn. He's always trying to learn more about it. So I think he'd be really good.
Now, I have one that you use for a different answer.
Okay.
Michael Vick.
Uh-huh.
I think Vick would be really good. I think he would bring a fun perspective, having been a quarterback, but also a dual threat quarterback. Obviously played in the league at a high level, a very good communicator.
Yeah.
I think he'd be really fun.
Yeah.
And I know he's done like here and there, right? He's done some
He
stuff.
has done some stuff.
I feel like he'd be a good, like, regular in the media type guy.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
All right, we'll move along here. Favorite player to talk to that you've covered? Just to chat with.
Yeah, it's got to be Kelsey.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was so much fun talking to Jason Kelsey because he's interested in everything. He's got this incredible desire to know about everything in the world, whether it's, the political climate in Botswana or, a book you just read, a band. I mean, it's amazing. And I mean, I've talked about the ongoing conversation we had about deli versus diner, and he's so into that stuff. And I mean, it was just like, I felt like I learned something every time I went down to his locker and BS with him. And one of the most interesting people I've ever met at work, out of work, friends, relatives, coworkers. I mean, he's a really fascinating guy. And it's been cool to see him. I mean, he's become so freaking famous, and it's been cool to see the way he's handled it and hasn't changed him. Still just that same down-to-earth guy. And it's funny because, like, for years, he was just some anonymous offensive lineman, 6th-round pick from Cincinnati. Nobody, he started making Pro Bowls, and he started, I think it probably wasn't even until 17 in the parade.
Yeah, that's where he really became like a folk hero.
That's where he became more of like a national figure.
Mm-hmm.
I think people here were starting to see it, but now he's like a full-blown like celebrity. I mean, it's kind of crazy to see, but yeah, I'll miss having him in there, to just bounce stuff off, I got to ask Kelsey about this movie or this book or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly good answer. I came up with Jordan Mailata. First off, the accent is fun.
Yeah.
It's like hearing him speak is fun to me.
Yeah.
But he's always just a fun guy to chat with. Every once in a while, when I'm not really doing any more work in the locker room, I'll just go back to the deep corner and hang out with him for a while.
Yeah, and that's kind of that. He'll play guitar back there and sing.
Mm-hmm. I've had many a conversation with him, like him strumming a guitar and me just hanging out.
Yeah.
Another one who was on my short list here was Chris Long.
Mm-hmm.
He'd be at the top of my like want to grab a beer with him list.
Yeah. Eric Allen was the other one that I was thinking of from. He could be an answer to a lot of these things because he was one of those guys. And back in the day, like we had so much more access to players. And like I would watch film with Seth Joyner in the film room. I mean, we're not even allowed in the building now.
Yeah.
And back then they didn't care. Eric Allen would watch film with me. So, you got to know the guys a lot better. Some of the convos I had with Doc after practice up at Lehigh, you just stand there out in the sun. He'd have, he'd stand out there for an hour just talking to Doc, just because he never knew where to go. Yeah, we don't get that anymore. Now we can't even interview him now.
I didn't like this next one.
You didn't like it? We can skip it if you want.
No, we'll do it. Least favorite player you've covered. Because I don't know if there's really an answer for me, at least.
Okay.
Who'd you end up with there?
Bill Romanowski.
No question.
No question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ask Barrett about Romo sometime. They were teammates. He was the most condescending, arrogant, just delusional, person I've ever met. He had such a high opinion of himself, and he thought all the media were just morons and talked to us like it. And like a lot of them are. A lot of them were, but not all of us. And he was just a like when if you needed to interview him, he would make such a production out of, I'm just going to lower myself to talk to these people now. And yeah, overrated player too. I did not like him. If you haven't picked up on that.
I haven't covered many just jerks.
Yeah, there haven't been many lately.
Yeah. And this guy is not a jerk. And there were times where we'd get along fine and he'd do the interviews, but Alshon was tough. Just getting him to, and I'm not even saying like he's a bad guy for not wanting to talk to me,
Mm-hmm.
but like it was just it was tough to cover him because he was like the best receiver on that team, and there would be times I needed him. Yeah, one time he shooed me away.
Yeah,
but I still like Alshon. You know, I don't dislike him, but
Yeah.
he was a tough guy to cover.
he was.
That's all.
Yeah.
Best team you've covered.
It's hard not to go with 17.
Mm-hmm.
I think the 2014 was close. The 1990 team was fascinating because I mean they weren't a great team, but it's the greatest defense in the last 40 years. And they were just breaking so many records, and they just never gave up points. They gave up like 12 points a game.
Yeah.
And so, Bud Carson was like a legendary guy. He was a D coordinator. But they just weren't a great team. They had all those quarterback injuries. And now, I'm sorry, 91, not 90, obviously. Randall got hurt opening day in Green Bay. And they went through a bunch of quarterbacks, and they didn't score many points. They didn't make the playoffs at 10-6. But if Randall hadn't gotten hurt, that could have easily been a Super Bowl team. But it's hard to go with anything other than 2017, just because there was just something so special about how those players all. Obviously, they were really talented, and Carson and Nick were both incredible that year. But there was something about that group of players, a lot of whom were only there for 1 year, and just the way they all just coalesced together.
It all kind of just lined up that year.
Yeah, it was really something to be around that team.
Although, you know what? I put down 2022.
Did you?
I think that was a better team than the 17 team.
Okay.
You disagree with that?
I don't know.
There were just that 22 team didn't have a weak spot.
Yeah, 17 didn't either. I mean, the 17 team was just so together. And again, I'll never forget writing on the. I think we were on a red eye back from LA after Carson got hurt. I think we had Mexican food for dinner at LAX because the only place open, and we took a red eye. And I remember sitting up there and writing that column on that flight saying, this team's still going to win a Super Bowl. I don't care who the quarterback is, because I just like the team so much.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't really, I wasn't saying Nick was going to be incredible. I thought he was good enough, but I just like, they're going to be the number 1 seed. They got to win 2 games at home and then win a Super Bowl. And I think they can do it. And that's how much I believe in that team.
Yeah. I mean, that 22 team was so close.
They were up 10 at halftime.
Mm-hmm. Most memorable non-playoff game you've covered?
Yeah, that was a no-brainer for me. It was the 2010 game at the Meadowlands against the Giants. And I actually went back and looked at some of the details of that game just to remind myself how crazy it was. 31-10 with under 8 minutes left.
And we've talked about him a bunch on this pod. Like, everyone remembers the way that game ended. Michael Vick was incredible late in that game.
He was incredible. And I just happened to have his stats in the last 8 minutes of that game. In the last 8 minutes of that game, he rushed for 90 yards on 3 carries. Last 8 minutes of the game, he rushed for 90 yards on 3 carries. And he was 6 for 11 for 120 yards passing. So he had 211 scrimmage yards in the last 8 minutes of that game. And the Eagles outgained the Giants in the last 8 minutes, 201-23.
Wow.
And they had the onside kick in there. Obviously outscored them 21-0. And they were getting killed. They had 18 net passing yards in the first half. They were just getting killed. I mean, 31-10. And then obviously the Deshaun punt return, the Matt Dodge punt. I just could not believe what I was seeing.
Yeah, it's insane.
Could not believe what I was seeing. And then, of course, Joe Webb was a couple weeks later, maybe a week later, and it all came crashing down. But I saw something that night I never saw before, and that was I've told this story. Deshaun came into the interview room, and I guess that was that the new stadium or the old stadium? I don't know, 2010. They were in the new stadium by then, right? I don't know. When did MetLife open? But you could look that up. But Deshaun comes in the interview room after that touchdown, And there's like 100 media in there waiting to talk to him. And he had his uniform on. He'd come right off the field. He was carrying his helmet, and he walks up to the podium, and he looks at us, and he goes, I need to collect my thoughts. And he steps away from the podium and just stands there with his head down for like 2 minutes, and then went back to the podium and talked to us about the return. Remember, he muffed the return.
Yeah, and it opened up the lane for him.
Yeah, it did. And I remember Jason Avant giving himself a concussion with a block.
It wasn't the prettiest block, but it worked.
It was a great block. He crushed a guy. I couldn't make out who it was. I was watching that. Couldn't make out who he blocked. But I don't know if a team's ever been down 21-1 with 8 minutes left, but I saw it happen.
Yeah, that was a heck of a one.
It was a heck of a one.
I put the Giants game, Jake Elliott.
Yeah.
That walk-off kick.
That was incredible.
I mean, the whole season might be different if they don't win that game.
Like 2010 was the last year of the old stadium. That wasn't the old stadium. It was Giants Stadium. Okay, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, that was a fun game. Just Jake Elliott getting carried off the field.
Yeah.
After winning that game. It changed his career. It changed the trajectory of that team.
He was a rookie.
Mm-hmm.
He was a rookie.
He was a rookie in danger of not making it through.
Yeah.
Like, the Eagles signed him because Caleb Sturgis got hurt. And
you wrote a great story on that too.
Thank you. Yeah. But it was like it could have gone the other way. Like, he misses that kick, even though it's kind of irrational to cut him. He hadn't been great other than that.
Yeah.
So if he misses that, maybe they bring in a new guy and he doesn't become like, and then who the heck knows what happens?
Right.
He ended up being such a big part of that team and has been such a big part of the team since then.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's incredible how many memorable finishes there have been in Eagles Giants games, especially up there.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the great ones have been up there. Not all of them, but yeah.
All right. Player you wished you would have covered or could have covered.
Oh, I didn't fill this one out.
Okay, well, I'll give you my answer.
Yeah.
It's someone who I always love hearing talk about football. It's Peyton Manning. I kind of wish they would do away with the guests on the Manning cast and just have those guys talk football while the game's happening. That's what I want. I know that the guests are like, they're trying to draw people in. I just want to hear Peyton talk about football while the game's going on and watch him process it in real time.
Okay.
He's a fun guy.
He is. How's Eli on that?
Eli's funny.
Is he?
Yeah. You don't like, Eli's really good on it too. And they have a good dynamic.
Really? I'm going to go with Duron Cherry. How about that?
Oh yeah.
Duron Cherry, to me, he was one of my favorite guys, one of my favorite players because, you know, he was a walk-on punter at Rutgers. Came out of Palmyra High School. He was a walk-on punter, and he eventually had to play safety because of injuries, and he became a pretty good safety. And then he goes to the Chiefs and has like, I don't know how many Pro Bowls he made, but he once had 4 interceptions in a game. And, you know, just a great guy, believes in Chiefs Hall of Fame. But he'd be the guy. I was, big fan of his.
That's good. The last thing we have here, one memory from each head coach you've covered. Obviously, I don't have as many as you.
How do you want to do this?
Well, let's, you start off chronologically.
With
and then
the guys you didn't cover.
Yeah. And then once we get on even playing field, we'll go back and forth.
All right. Well, but the first coach I covered was Buddy. And, you know, I know some people have heard the story about when he took all the writers out to dinner in LA. It was 1990, and there was rumors he was going to get fired. The Eagles were 0-2. If they lost to the Rams out there, he was going to get fired. But he didn't care. So there was a writer named Tim Kawakami from the Daily News who had gone out to the paper out there, and Buddy loved Timmy. So Buddy called Tim and said, I want you to find a restaurant with a good wine list. We're all going to go out to dinner. I'll take all the beat writers out. And the funny thing was, Merrill Reese didn't go out because he doesn't go out the night before games, but the coach went out with us. So Tim went and he interviewed this like what's the word? Sommeliers, and talked to their wine critic and went to different and found a restaurant called Mr. Stocks. They had a big back private room for us. There was like 20 of us and had an incredible wine list. So Buddy sends 2 limos. I don't know about the ethics of all this, but Buddy sent 2 limos to pick up the beat guys. Remember, I was in Buddy's limo. He was just ripping former players. It was so funny. Called one linebacker brain dead. I'm not going to say who it was, but we get to Mr. Stocks. I'm going to make this as short as possible. It's the best story ever. We get to Mr. Stocks, and we all get seated, and like none of us knew Buddy was like a wine expert, but it was really important to him that this place had the best wine list, and the wine list was like this bound, like it looked like a book from like the Middle Ages, like this giant bound edition. And Buddy's goes through every page. He's looking at every page, and he finally closes it and he gives it to the wine steward and says, "We'll take a couple bottles of white and a couple bottles of red." And that's and we all just lost it. Even Buddy was cracking up. He's like, I don't know. I
appreciate the commitment to that bit.
Yeah. And that's the short version.
Mm.
Yeah, it was hysterical. And one of the limos ended up guys, I don't even want to say what happened, but it was a pretty crazy night.
Yeah.
Things have changed, Dave.
Yeah. All right, next coach.
Rich Kotite. Thanksgiving Day, I'd written a column, and there was another writer. We both written columns ripping him. The team was awful. It was probably, I don't know what year it was, 92, 93. And they lost like 5 straight games. And we got called into Kotite's office on Thanksgiving morning. They had early practice, and he starts just like screaming at us and like, "Oh, you say I never signed a good free agent. I signed Vicek Himmer." And I'm like, "Rich, he's 34. like you signed a 34-year-old guy to a 1-year contract. His free agent record." That's what I wrote about. It was awful. And he's screaming at us, and he's cursing at us, and it was really ugly. It was awful. And the other writer who was in there, finally it was a quiet moment. He said, "Rich, I thought you were going to invite us to Thanksgiving dinner." But yeah, I've been yelled at by some coaches, but that was an all timer.
Yeah.
Who's next? Ray Rhodes. We used to do it. We still do an annual. We called it a tab session back then. It's now an embargo session. But the writers would sit down with Ray and ask him like big picture questions for our. We all did these tabs, these tabloid special sections. Well, the one day, Ray Rhodes, I don't know what was going on with him, but he started telling the most off-color stories. None of them were anything we could ever write, but he started telling stories about when he was a kid, about his family, about his friends, Ronnie Lott stories. They were all utterly unusable. They were completely like X-rated. You know, like he could, if he did this today, he would have been fired like that day.
Yeah.
We were in there we were in a little room at the vet, right by, I remember where we were, and we couldn't get him on track. And he was talking about like fights he had I wish I still had a recording of it, because it was I've never laughed so hard in my life, but it was completely off the rails. And the PR guy was trying to like, "Ray, why don't you answer the question?" Ray would just keep going with these stories, and it was pretty wild, but it was none of us used any of the quotes from that. It was nothing to write. And then Andy.
Yeah.
Did you cover Andy?
I mean, I don't really have an Andy story. I covered a few training camp practices, but not enough to.
I'll give it a real short one. I'm sure people will be happy. Late in Andy's career is probably 2011. They were 4-8. And I wrote a piece saying that he should be fired. And, this is a guy that had been the greatest coach in Eagles history. Never got over the hump, never won it, but they were in the playoffs every year. Great players, great teams. They won 10 playoff games under Andy, but it was clearly he had lost the team, and Lurie kept him another year, which was a mistake. But late in the year, I wrote like he should be fired. After practice one day, we were allowed to practice. He calls me over. The PR guy was like, "Andy wants to talk to you." I'm like, "Oh shoot." I'm like, what's going to happen here? So I walk up, and he's standing there at practice and read your column. "Oh yeah?" He goes, "I would have written the same thing."
Wow.
Yeah. And then I was dismissed.
Well, I'll never forget that Jeffrey Lurie press conference after the 2011 season where I was there for that. And I remember we all thought, oh, he's firing Andy. Like, he went through all the reasons why he should fire him.
He set it up.
Yeah. And then said, but, and if you went through all that, like, if you went back and watched the first, like, 70% of his remarks, you think, oh, he's firing the head coach.
And with Lurie, 70% of his marks is about 2 hours. He went into great detail about why he was going to fire him and then didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So now we're up to Chipper.
Yeah. What do you got?
My favorite Chips, and I only covered Chip briefly. I got here, well, I got back here in 15, covered the end of that season. My favorite Chip memory wasn't even when he was the coach. It was after, when we were at the owners' meetings in Boca. And the night before, he told us, I'm not answering any, because he was the 49ers coach at that point. He said, I'm not answering any Eagles questions. But then one by one, we just, like, it was funny because there were like 2 49ers writers and we let them have like the first few questions. And then it was like 45 minutes of like, bah, 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 bah. And eventually he talked a lot about his time here and what went wrong and passed off some blame. It was pretty incredible.
I'll have to find that story. Yeah, I remember that happening.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite Chip story was it was a few days after he had cut Deshaun, and I was covering the Penn relays. And I was doing a story. Penn had 3 winners that day. The high jumper. They had the woman from Robbinsville. I wish I could remember her name. Won the heptathlon maybe. They had 3 winners, and so I was doing like a story on Penn. It was the first time since like the 1800s they had 3 winners at their own meet. So I'm running down to the high jump area to find their high jumper, and I'm running past, like, you know, there was races going on in the backstretch, and all of a sudden I hear Roob, and I look over and there's Chip. So I guess Deshaun got cut before, after the 13th season, right? So it was April of 14. And Chip's watching the Masters hundreds, so like the old guys, 100-meter dashes. And Chip was coming from Oregon, he was a big track guy, and so we stood there and talked about track for quite a while. We watched the old guys running the hundreds, like 75-year-olds, 85-year-olds. And the whole time I'm thinking, should I ask him about cutting Deshaun? Because he hadn't talked about it, he hadn't acknowledged it, and it was obviously a very controversial roster move. But I just didn't think he wasn't going to answer. It wasn't the right time. And I was really tempted, but I didn't bring it up. And then I went off back to so we talked for like 10 minutes. It was like the longest conversation I ever had with him. It was all about track. And that night, I think it was that evening, I got a call from the PR guy. It was Derek Boyko at the time, saying, Chip loves you because you didn't ask about Deshaun. If you had, he never would have answered, and he would have hated you. So that's my Chip story.
That's good. How about Doug? You got a favorite Doug story?
Yeah, it was at the Super Bowl. It was at the final media day.
Mm-hmm.
I'd wanted, you know this story, you were there. I really wanted to do a story on how the 99 season went for him and the kind of the juxtaposition of how he was viewed and treated by Eagles fans in 17 compared to 99. I mean, he was hated here. They threw stuff at his family. They couldn't even bring his family to games. It was really bad. And I just it was not a kind of question you're going to ask at a press conference.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to get I just needed like a minute. I just needed a minute with Doug, and I just couldn't get it. And it was really frustrating. And I really wanted to write the story, but it didn't look like I was going to have a chance to do it. And his last press conference, I don't remember if it was Thursday morning, Friday morning. Well, I guess it was probably Friday morning.
Thursday. I think Thursday. I think Friday was an off day.
Yeah, Thursday at the Mall of America. And he's finishing up, and as soon as he gets done, I see the PR director. And I run over there. And if you remember, like, where they did the pressers, it's just this big room with all these curtains around and everything. There was a little door behind where he did it. And it was a hallway that went like underneath the Mall of America, out toward the hotel. Their hotel was right next door across the little parking lot. And I was told, you have as much time as it takes for Doug to walk from here to that door. It was about a minute. And I asked him about that, and he was really good about it, really open, and said how much that hurt, how much it hurt him and his family. And I said, they're the same fans that love you now. And he talked about it. And, he said he really appreciates the support. He never really forgot how he was treated when he got there, but, it was a really emotional topic for him. And I remember I ran back in and was able to talk to Tim Houck, who was on his coaching staff and had played on that team in '99, and was really, really good about his vantage point for how Doug was treated in '99. And I was really proud of that story. And I really appreciated Doug giving me the time. And 3 days before coaching a Super Bowl, he had just done his like 5th straight day of media. Like, I'm sure I was the last person he wanted to see, but nobody read the story. It was crazy. Like, I remember seeing the analytics and like nobody read that story, which I
that's when you don't look up the numbers.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't have, but I was really, I was proud of that story and really grateful to Doug for his honesty and his contribution.
Yeah. My favorite Doug was a little bit before then, before they even played the Falcons in the playoffs. All these coaches always say they don't read, they don't know who's picking who. Doug knew everyone who was picking against him going into that game. And I remember he like called out where he had like been out at our media house and for something. I remember like walking back to the building with him, and he was like asking, like, well, he was asking everyone who picked against him, like, why'd you pick against us? Why'd you pick against us? And I remember one person was like, Nick Foles is your quarterback. Like, at that point, Nick hadn't been playing very well, so it wasn't a crazy thought. And it just stuck with me how confident Doug was. Like, the rest of the league kind of counted them out, even though they were the 1 seed. Like, they had all these injuries. The quarterback thing was obviously an issue at the time. But man, he was just so confident that they were going to win. And that stuck with me because it wasn't, he can fake it a lot of places, but like when you're just chatting, walking down the sidewalk, like, no, he was just full bore head confidence.
Interesting.
Yeah. How about Nick?
I don't really have anything.
I have one.
Go ahead.
And it was early on in his time. I went down to the Senior Bowl the year he was hired. So he had only been on the job for a little bit of time. And, the first impression of him was obviously that press conference, the virtual press conference that was just a disaster.
Yeah.
It's a really funny disaster. And I didn't know Nick that well yet. And we're down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, and he comes over to chat with a few of us. And I made a joke about it, like not really sure if it would land or not. But he laughed at it. And I was like, okay, like we're off to a good start here. But I basically said, like, I like what you did. You set the bar really low. So anything you do, you're going to look great. And he found it funny, which was good.
Okay. I wish I had something, but like, we're so insulated from him, unlike all these other coaches that we talked about, that you had an opportunity to get to know them as people. I never really had that opportunity with Nick. I mean, I had a one-on-one with him when he first got hired about his core values and why at the time it seemed like a good topic. It's kind of played out.
I was like, you hear core values and you shudder.
I mean, I asked him just the whole connecting thing. I'm like, don't players like kind of just roll their eyes at that stuff? Pro players. And it was good. It was good. It was a good story, but that was on Zoom. And he comes over like at practice once in a while, say hi and have a very short conversation. But I don't have a story.
Yeah, which is kind of funny because to me, he seems like the most normal coach that I've covered, at least.
Yeah, I don't even blame him. I mean, we're just kept, we're just kept apart from him.
Any of the stories I have are not from like, they're like at the combine or like at a, Senior Bowl.
You'd think there'd be something from the Super Bowl or I got nothing.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah.
That's all we had there. I do want to mention this email address we have, eagleeye@nbcuni.com. You can send your questions. You can send your comments, your criticisms if you want. We won't read those, of course, but no, you can send any of that. And I have one here in front of me from Connor, Recently, there was a story out of Kansas City that the Chiefs were considering using their safety, who has some kicking experience, as the kicker within the new kickoff formation. The idea that being under the new rules, there's a much higher chance that the kicker will need to make a tackle. What do you think about that idea? And if the Eagles were considering something similar, who would you have kick instead of Jake Elliott?
Mark Simino available?
See, this is tricky because I don't know about their kicking skills. I think that's something worth exploring.
Yeah.
But I don't know if, I think the delta between Jake Elliott as a kicker to the next best kicker who could also tackle.
Yeah.
I think you're better off having someone who can angle a kick where you want it to go.
I would think so.
Yeah.
It's a fun thought, though.
You would need to have someone who's really good at kicking. Yeah. I don't know if they have that guy.
No.
I am fascinated to see what these kickoffs look like.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah. That's the email address, eagleye@nbcuni.com. We will continue to answer them in the off season, and then once the season starts, keep them all coming there. It's a lot of fun. And also, if you enjoy the podcast in general, you know what to do. Rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, please click the like button, subscribe there as well. Ruben, any final words?
No.
All right, that's it for Eagle Eye. Ruben, Frank, Dave Zangara, we'll talk to you soon.